afternoon, everyone. My name is Liz Davey. I'm at Tulane University in New Orleans. I'm actually the Director of Environmental Affairs here at Tulane. My presentation today is about a class I teach called Responding to the Challenge of Climate Change, and I'll call it a wayfinding course. I start by just calling out the distinguishing features of this class as a CAMEL resource. It's a source for an introductory class in climate change. It provides a framework for an interdisciplinary approach in situations where team teaching is limited. The class uses discussions of peer review that we really need to have when talking about climate science to introduce students to academic research and writing. And this really aims to steer students towards climate change courses and faculty doing work related to climate change across the university. So here are the basics of the course. It uses the Climate Change Consensus as its textbook. I've offered it through the honors program at Tulane in fall 2010, and then I'm midway through it this semester. It was inspired by the Focus Session Teach-In on Climate Change, which was an event that was held in 2008 all across the country. And they asked universities to put together a program that day on climate change using their own faculty. And our group at Tulane put on a pretty successful event, and we were struck by how many faculty there were that we could include, and many of whom really didn't know about. The larger environmental community really didn't have a sense of their work. And of course, in the plenary session in the middle of the day, the first question from a student was, "Why can't you offer this as a class?" So inspiration for this course aimed at freshmen and sophomores. It includes both essays and exams. And I mentioned that as an instructor, I'm actually the sustainability point person for Tulane, a staff person here at Tulane. I'm one of the first generation of environmental coordinators at universities. I've been here for about 13 years. My training is actually in the humanities. I have an undergraduate degree in environmental studies in English and a PhD in English. I'm calling it a wayfinding course. I call it a wayfinding course because it has this explicit goal of helping students develop an academic plan for their time at Tulane that relates to climate change. So I do this by including a lot of faculty visitors in the course. Some they give lectures, and they can be lectures that from their research, talk about their research, or they can be lectures that are drawn from courses that they teach here at Tulane. I also found that a great way to have faculty participate in courses is to invite them to just come in and do question and answer sessions. This limits the preparation that they have to do, and the students actually really appreciate the less formal interaction with the faculty member. And choosing and inviting faculty members, course availability is a big part of it, but I really try to highlight the faculty and invite the faculty who are teaching courses that will be of interest to the students and that they will be able to take over the next few years at Tulane. So when I call the class Responding to the Challenge of Climate Change, it's about responding in terms of your academic work, your wing and the research that you do at Tulane, as well as your response as a citizen. Okay, so the next couple slides give overviews of the different units in the class. And the way I'm able to accommodate these very different faculty speakers over the course of the semester is to have 4 broad thematic units. So these slides show the kind of the theme of the unit, the approach of the unit, and list some of the readings at the top of the screen, and give you a sense of some of the guest lectures at the bottom of the screen. So the first unit approaches climate science through the IPCC. And for those of us in the humanities and maybe also in the social sciences, I think teaching the science of climate change is really challenging and maybe really not an appropriate role for us. So I begin the class with questions about how we know what we know about climate change. And you read the Summary for Policymakers of the IPCC's fourth assessment report, and we spend a lot of time discussing how it was produced. In this work, Stephen Schneider's Science as a Contact Sport is a wonderful insider's companion to the IPCC report. He describes many scenes inside the IPCC meetings, and it's really a wonderful guide to the IPCC for the students. In this unit, I try to introduce students to scientists who are doing work related to climate change at Tulane. We've had great lectures by Brad Rosenheim, who's a marine geologist in our Earth and Environmental Sciences Department, a really wonderful lecture on paleoclimatology. And then also in this unit, I assign the students a journal article that's related to climate change, written by a Tulane scientist, and invite the author to come into the class to talk about the process of writing the article. And this gives the students a real detailed sense of what exactly a peer-reviewed journal article is, and then it also gives them a much fuller picture of the work of a Tulane scientist. Towards the end of this unit, we also discuss why so many Americans don't understand or doubt the science, and also the challenges of communicating climate science. And the chapter in Schneider's book that's a great starting point for discussion, I think it's meteorology. And they also had them watch a video of Naomi Oreskes giving a very condensed lecture on her book, Merchants of Doubt. And that outlines mechanisms through which doubt has been created. And the students really found that riveting. The next unit approaches technology choices for reducing emissions through greenhouse gas emissions inventories and wedges. And this image here is just the results of the Tulane's greenhouse gas emissions inventory. Shows it in recent years by scope, which are categories used in greenhouse gas emissions reporting to indicate the different levels of responsibility for emissions. And when you have students look at what information went into producing this graph, it interests them to what the different greenhouse gases are, the fuels that are sources of greenhouse gas emissions, and then also the activities that contribute the most to emissions. And many universities have now conducted these greenhouse gas emissions inventories, hundreds available to read on the website of the American College and University President's Climate Commitment. If you don't have a greenhouse gas emissions inventory at your school, it actually is a fabulous project for students, but it's also easy to find one that will be of interest to the students in another university. We use the Clean Cool Planet Campus Carbon Calculator to do ours, and I base a number of assignments on that. Basically just having Tulane students, the students in my class, enter the input numbers for our Tulane inventory into the calculator, just so they get a feel for it as a tool and start to understand concepts like emissions coefficients, electricity coefficients, regional differences in emissions coefficients, in electricity coefficients. So it just kind of it makes it all these concepts a little bit more close and tangible to them. If you're a sustainability director at your university, I'm sure he or she would just be a great collaborator or a presenter during this unit. The second part of this unit is to use the article by Robert Sokolow and Stephen Pacala on stabilization wedges as a jumping off point for talking about technology choices for reducing emissions. And for those of you who aren't familiar with this article, the lights down there in the bottom right-hand corner, just a very simple description of it. They basically provide an estimate of emissions reductions needed to stabilize the climate, and then they divide those reductions into units that they call a wedge. And you can see the wedges in the bottom left. They're the trough that fill up that the wedges are the 7 triangles that fill up that green stabilization triangle. And basically, units of needed emissions reductions. And what's really interesting in the article is they lay out a menu of about 17 different technology choices and how much that technology would have to be implemented, the scale of implementation that would be needed to equal a wedge of emissions reductions. I sometimes describe this kind of a measuring cup for students to use to compare different technology choices. And this is just such a useful starting point for discussion of these technology choices that they've actually made a game out of it. You can find it at their website at Princeton, where students discuss and actually choose the wedges, the kinds of technology, whether it's solar, wind, efficiency for buildings, vehicles, nuclear switching tools to fill up those wedges. So at this point in the course, the chapters in the Climate Solutions Consensus are a great addition. They direct address the stabilization wedges article, and they also provide tools for students to use for weighing the different wedges, the different options. Okay, and here's a summary of the read and guest lectures from this section, this unit. This is a great time of the semester to visit local projects. We have some wonderful LEED green schools underway here in New Orleans, so we visited there the first time I taught the course, and visited solar installations 2 weeks ago here in New Orleans. It's also a really interesting time to talk about what's currently happening in climate change in U.S. law, and that's because the different concepts and terms that we learn about in greenhouse gas reporting and talking about technology choices come up when you talk about what's currently happening, especially by the current administration. I'm also adding a class on fracking to this unit. It's actually this afternoon, showing selections from 2 fracking documentaries, Gasland, and then one that's set here in Louisiana, Haynesville. Okay. The third unit approaches the different policy options through the framework of the concept of climate justice. That's the recognition those who are suffering or will suffer the most from the impacts of climate change are often those who have contributed the least. And this is a factor to consider when weighing policy options. And then also for the purpose of the class, it broadens the possible disciplinary perspectives that you can bring into the discussion. So you can bring in faculty visitors from philosophy, ethics, anthropology, sociology, literary studies, as well as faculty from political science and economics. And this is a unit that we really talk about the inter-treaties and cap and trade policies and carbon taxes. I call out Timmons Roberts' work here with Bradley Parks. He has a wonderful book, A Climate of Injustice. And in this book, they quantify inequalities and vulnerability to climate change. And then they also have some wonderful discussions of how people in different countries see fairness in negotiations of emissions reductions. And they have some wonderful tables and graphs that are great starting points for discussion with the students. One of the real highlights of the first class was a talk by a faculty member here at Tulane on how economists contribute to addressing climate change. And he spoke directly to the students, about work that's being done, across his discipline related to climate change. And I think that kind of direct reflection on the work being done within a discipline is really useful to students who are just beginning their academic careers. Okay, and then the final unit is on adaptation. And for us, it's talking about adaptation. I approach adaptation through New Orleans, but this was a unit where I think you would want your course to go much more local. and return to the projected climate change impacts for your particular area. And of course, for us here in New Orleans, sea rise is a really major issue, particularly with its implications for hurricane protection and restoration of coastal wetlands. And I try to include, I include one reading that gives them an example of regional projections, and then one reading that provides an example of how communities are trying to incorporate those projections into planning for the future. And a couple of years ago, we had a really wonderful conference here put on by the Earth Institute at Columbia about climate adaptation on the Gulf Coast. And from that, I have an article on the projected changes for the Gulf Coast region, and that also steered me towards Florida's climate change plan, which actually includes a chapter on adaptation strategies. And also including a class about green jobs in this unit, and that's both because it's the end of the semester and a good time to talk about green jobs, but then also to broaden their sense of green jobs to include not just related to mitigation, but also work related to adaptation. Last writing assignment really tries to push them to reflect on the different disciplinary perspectives that they've heard over the course of the semester, and to think of their own interests and the work that they might do at Tulane within the context of a particular discipline or major. The Tulane Honors Program actually has a prescribed format for an honors thesis prospectus, so as that as the basis of the final writing assignment. And them to draft a prospectus for a thesis addressing some aspect of climate change. And the top half of this slide gives the parameters of the assignment. And basically a mini research paper assignment, and it comes along with the standard session of library research training over at the library. Gives them an opportunity to pursue a topic of their choice, but also pushes them to look into the faculty they'd want to work with, the courses that they'd want to take, to push them to identify possible advisors for their project. The assignment picks up from those earlier discussions of peer-reviewed literature and asks them to start thinking about themselves as researchers and writers within a particular academic community related to the challenge of climate change. Okay, so just how has this worked out for the students? At the end of the first course, the class had positive evaluations. One line of success was I took them to a talk put on by the economics department, and they were able to follow a departmental talk, really engage with the topic. So I saw that as a sign of success. Just getting them to the point that they can participate in these conversations, I think, is a goal of the course. I saw a lot of signs of engagement after the course. I wrote a lot of letters of recommendation for students in the class for fellowships and internships and foreign study programs, all related to the environmental issues and climate change. One of the students went on to actually update our greenhouse gas emissions inventory for the campus. And we had a real high participation of this group at the Spring Environmental Law Conference, which is put on by our law school. And I go check with the honors program and get the subtopics of all their honors thesis projects right now. About half of them from their class should be writing this year. And this just kind of summarizes or gives some of the comments that students made on the evaluations for the course. They really love the discussion. They really like to talk about these issues. And the variety of the course really its strength and its weakness. They like hearing from lots of different instructors. They felt like they had covered all aspects of climate change. They noted that they found it difficult to bring together information from so many fields, particularly in the writing assignments. And the readings were tough. I think that's one of the real challenges of teaching a class like this. I found the material a little bit oversimplified, And there's a number of calls for more field trips. Okay, so, just to show you again, from the CAMEL website where you can find the syllabus. It's syllabus from the 2010 course, and I'll update with the syllabus from this course at the end of the semester. And there's my contact information if I can follow up with any materials or questions. Okay, now I see things are in the I see questions in the chat box. This is my first time doing a webinar. And I'm going to just read some of the questions and answer them. So one question from Diane Murphy: how many students have taken the course and which majors? The wonderful story, there are just 15 students in each course in these honors colloquium seminars. And they're from all different majors. And that's actually one of the things that really surprised me when I first taught the course, is how many in to the class identified with a particular discipline. So that probably about a third of the class, it was an actual exploration of possible majors, and for the rest of the students, it was a kind of thinking through of how their discipline relates to the overall issue of climate change. And it looks like the question. Well, thank you very much for your time, and I guess we'll close it up there. Question now from Sunny: I'm working on the GHG inventory and accounting field consulting for NYSERDA in New York right now. I'm just which region are these results in this chart for overall GHG emissions? So I'm assuming that's a question about the Tulane GHG inventory, and that's for New Orleans. I forget the exact E-grid right now that we use for the electricity coefficients, but it's for our overall greenhouse gas emissions. Actually, in Scope 3, we include commuting, business travel, waste figures, and of course, it includes all the direct emissions, the bus vehicles, and the power plant on natural gas used by the power plant on campus, and then also all the electricity use. Thank you all so much for your time.